Hi there, folks. This is Tony for A Minute to Midnight, and welcome. I have with me today a pretty regular guest, though it's been a little while longer than usual since our last time we spoke, but I have Alex Newman with me, and that is always a fascinating time that we have, so I'm sure today will be good as well. Welcome, Alex.
Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
And as always, there's tons of things we could talk about. I'm really interested, particularly to start off with a couple of things, and one of them is COP29, the whole climate change narrative and what they've come up with. So you're a bit well versed on that stuff, so perhaps you could give us a little bit of a rundown on it.
Yeah, well, thank you, Tony. And they just came up with an agreement yesterday, over the weekend at the COP29. Every year they come up with an agreement. They take another giant leap forward, to borrow a term from Chairman Mao, a great leap forward. And this year's was pretty dramatic. I mean, it's not getting a lot of media attention, but it is very, very significant. So one of the big things that they agreed to was the rules for the global carbon markets. In other words, they're going to put a price on CO2, then you're going to have to buy and sell credits to be able to emit CO2. And when you realize that you emit CO2 every time you take a breath, the full implications of that should be sinking in.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that next week they're going to be charging you money to breathe, but they have said themselves they're going to gradually ratchet down the amount of permits in existence, and that way they're going to gradually cause the price of CO2 permits to go up and up and up, to the point where it's going to become very, very expensive just to live a normal life, assuming that's going to be allowed. You're going to get a carbon ration, a carbon budget, and beyond that, if you want to emit more CO2, you'll have to buy and sell these carbon credits. So a lot of people are going to get rich from this. The big mega banks will get rich from this. The oil companies will get rich from this. The third world kleptocrats that are expecting to get lots of money, they will be getting rich from this. The international bureaucracies will get rich from this. And the people who will pay for it all is, of course, the poor and the middle class across the West and ultimately around the whole entire world. So really, really significant news. They've agreed to the rules for a global carbon market, and you should be hearing this on the front page of every newspaper, but of course you're not. The other big element of the deal, they have approved $1.3 trillion in annual wealth redistribution by 2025, so 10 years from now, under the guise of climate reparations. So the thinking is Western people invented the modern world, air conditioning, airplane, cars, refrigeration, modern medicine, etc. And so as a result of doing such a horrible thing for humanity, you now have to pay, and you have to pay big. 1.3 trillion a year should suffice, although they hope they're going to get more eventually. And that's going to come in the form of transfer payments, so taxes on the middle class in the Western world, transferred to third world kleptocrats who agree to play ball here. So that's very significant. And then some of the longer term things, we're going through this really quick. Obviously, it's a large agreement. But one of the major announcements that was made there, they will be adding climate literacy to the international standardized tests put out by the OECD. It's called the PISA test. And as people should understand, what is tested becomes what is taught. And so if every child in the world is going to be taking international tests that have climate knowledge, your government's going to have to brainwash the kids with climate nonsense, or they're going to look bad on these international rankings. They'll say, oh, New Zealand isn't doing a very good job educating children. America isn't doing a very good job educating children. So that'll be in place by 2029. They announced it at this conference. You also have radical advancing of the UN's Faith for Earth initiative, where they're bringing all the religions of the world together to basically sing Kumbaya and save Mother Earth from the ravages of humanity. We were able to catch up with Eric Solheim, the head of the UNEP, for a long time at the UN Faith for Earth Pavilion. He made some really absurd biblical arguments about why all Christians have a duty to support Mother Earth. He said, yeah, in the book of Revelation, there's a big flood. It's like, actually, no, there's not a big flood in the book of Revelation, Mr. Solheim. But somehow the green gods demand climate action. And so they're working very hard on that. You've also got public health taking center stage, right? You have the head of the World Health Organization declaring that climate change is one of the top public health threats facing humanity. So this is now going to be inserted into every area of your health. I actually interviewed the World Health Organization's director of the Department of Environment, Climate Change, and Public Health, and giant word salad meaning nothing, but basically, yes, climate change and health are one, and so submit to our decrees. So this is in everything now. And I think a lot of people were hoping that because Trump was elected president, this was all going to go away. Sorry, guys, bad news, but that's not going to happen. In fact, just to make sure everybody understood that, a delegation of 5 Republican congressmen showed up at this thing and told the world, the media in America didn't pay much attention, but they told the world that we're going to keep reducing CO2 emissions, that we're going to keep playing along with this fraud. They actually promised they're going to keep big parts of Biden's climate agenda. They called it the Inflation Reduction Act. So, yeah, not good at all, Tony.
And I noticed on our New Zealand, one of our main websites yesterday, there was an article where the representative from the New Zealand government was spouting how great it was to have come up with this agreement for the carbon credits thing. So it doesn't matter that they're from a completely different party than before, you know, when we had the sort of more socialist government all crowing over it. Now we have a more conservative government, and they are as well. So it doesn't seem to matter what, you know, political spectrum they come from. All the countries are going lockstep with this whole thing. So
yeah, Tony, that's really important for people to understand too, because again, and Americans don't want to hear this. I have found that there's a tendency now among Trump supporters, well, we don't want to hear anything bad. I'm sorry, guys, but you need to face reality. Face reality as it is rather than as you wish it was. Mm-hmm. And yes, Donald Trump has spoken out very clearly against the climate scam. In fact, he said one of the top priorities of the Make America Great Again movement was to destroy this scam. He's called it a hoax. He's called it a fraud. He has made fun of the climate change predictions. He's made fun of the windmills and the solar panels, and that's all great. And some of his key people are very much in line with that. The guy he nominated to be the Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, is the CEO of an oil company and has been very vocal exposing this fraud. But then you look at some of the others. You've got Lee Zeldin, congressman from New York, who is going to now serve, if he's approved, if he's confirmed, as the administrator of the EPA, the equivalent of the Environment Ministry, I guess, for New Zealand. And he was one of the first. He was one of a tiny handful, fringe of Republican congressmen to embrace the man-made global warming hypothesis. Even though less than 1 in 3 Republican voters believe human activities are causing climate change, somehow this guy embraced it and got chosen to lead the EPA. You've got Elon Musk, very, very vocal for years now about the alleged need for a carbon tax and carbon markets and government support for all these green schemes. So obviously, huge player. Howard Lutnick, the co-chair of the transition team, is also now nominated to serve as Secretary of Commerce. Huge supporter of carbon markets. In fact, his company, Cantor Fitzgerald, it was one of the instrumental players in building the carbon market infrastructure. So this is just a sample of the people involved here who are playing along. So yes, we've got a new party in power now. Republicans have Congress, House and Senate, and the Republicans have the White House. But unless Donald Trump really comes out here with a chainsaw, the momentum, the inertia is going to keep this going. And yes, Trump will probably withdraw from the Paris Agreement. I spoke with his former EPA chief of staff who actually orchestrated the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement last time. And she did tell me we're hoping to look at the underlying treaty, the UNFCCC, UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, to get out of that and make it harder. But, if the inertia continues, if the momentum continues here, we'll probably have a little bit of a pause in the hysteria in the United States. But the UN will keep going. The brainwashing of children will keep going, so that 4 years from now, when Donald Trump is out of office, assuming everything holds together as we hope it will, they'll come right back with a vengeance, and they'll pick up right where they left off, building these carbon markets, regardless of who's in office.
To be honest, with Elon Musk and you've got J.D. Vance with his AI investments and all, and Peter Thiel having mentored him and all that, I don't have a lot of hope and faith that it's not going to continue in the same direction with those two people, only maybe worse in terms of the AI and all of that, surveillance and stuff. So to me, it's sort of like, I think it's all a bit of a ruse to get people relaxed into something's changing, but really the big things won't. They'll probably just continue advancing. So moving off from that, though, Trump's not in office yet, but Biden obviously is still there and made a big deal, it seems, of allowing the Ukraine to be able to fire American-made missiles into Russian territory. And of course, France and other countries are coming out saying the same thing, authorizing that. And now we have Russia, Putin came out broadcasting the other day saying there'll be repercussions, against the players that do. So what are your thoughts on that? Because to me, this is a real big thing in terms of where this is going and the potential for war, even nuclear war eventually. So,
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Tony. I think there is an agenda here to kick off World War III. And what the Biden administration is doing here, and we know Joe Biden's not making these decisions. I mean, the guy doesn't know what he had for breakfast. He can't even read the teleprompter anymore. They're hiding him. But the people who are calling the shots behind the scenes, most likely Barack Obama, the former people involved at the CIA, and obviously the Council on Foreign Relations, the deep staters that run U.S. policy regardless of who's in office. They have decided that they want to continue stirring this up. And unfortunately, we're seeing something I think very silly among conservatives in America, and that's an embrace of Vladimir Putin, as if he were some sort of great heroic Christian leader trying to save civilization. This is another one of those false dichotomies where they give you two bad options, and we're all expected to rally around one or the other. Frankly, I think as Christians, we should say no. Both of these plans are very bad. We're not going to rally behind a former KGB gangster, and we're not going to rally behind Joe Biden and whoever's pulling the strings behind Joe Biden. Both of these ideas are very bad. But I do think they want to kick off a third world war. And I've been saying this for years now, and people thought I was just being funny or goofy. I think there's a real chance we could see a nuclear conflict, potentially even before January 20th. Now, I don't know how likely that is, but the chances are certainly greater than zero. They're certainly increasing radically as a result of these policies. And to be fair to the Russians, the Kremlin has said very, very clearly for months now, we consider this to be the U.S. becoming a belligerent in this conflict. We consider World War III to be imminent if this continues. We consider our nuclear doctrine to be that we will use, we reserve the right to use nuclear weapons against anybody that we believe threatens the existence of the Russian state. And it's pretty easy for them to make a case now that, hey, they're helping the Ukrainians. This poses a threat to our continued existence. We're going to drop some nukes. So I don't think this is a game. I think the people who are not paying attention to this, and we need to be praying for peace, but preparing for not peace. And that's not a pretty thought. Now the Scandinavians have gotten themselves in a whole mess of trouble. The Finns and the Swedes have now joined NATO. So I don't think a massive third world war involving nuclear weapons is out of the realm of possibility. And in fact, I'm very concerned that we could see something like that kick off before January 20th.
Well, and even if it isn't nuclear, you've got potential for, well, this new Russian ballistic missile, I can't remember what it's called. It starts with O, whatever the Russian word is. That's so fast, and Putin and his, minions are saying there's no way anybody in the West can stop these weapons. And so even if it's not nuclear, they've start hitting back at like places, American bases in Poland and so on. Well, then there's going to be tit for tat, and and eventually it could go nuclear. But unless somebody stops and says we're not going to do this, how do you avoid a situation like that, either before January the 20th or shortly after?
Yeah, and that's one of the dangers here, is that there are no easy off-ramps here, right? Nobody wants to throw the Ukrainians under the bus and say, hey, good luck, right? Suckers. Nobody wants to do that. And of course, the Ukrainians agreed to hand over their nuclear missiles with that agreement under Bill Clinton that everybody was going to ensure that Ukraine remained neutral, that there was no invasions, that their security was not going to be under threat, et cetera. And of course, everybody has turned their back on that now, and Ukraine is being pummeled into the ground. So this is really, really dangerous. And I don't think Putin is who people think he is. I want to emphasize that. I first did a deep dive into Putin's background in 2014 when the mess in Ukraine was really, really kicking up. And I had kind of followed him. I had looked into him a little bit, but I did a real deep dive investigation for a cover story that we did in the New American back in 2014. And what I found out is that this guy is deeply connected to the Western establishment. He was a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. Him and Henry Kissinger were buddies to the point where they were even eating private dinners at each other's houses. Kissinger would show up in Moscow and Putin would have a military parade and give him all kinds of fancy awards and say nice things. They write about each other in their autobiographies and their friendship. I mean, they're like, kissing cousins. And of course, Henry Kissinger, key architect of the New World Order, a poodle for the Rockefellers, the guy who recruited Klaus Schwab. So we're being programmed to believe that there's these two sides in the conflict and that one side is good and one side is bad, depending on who you are, where you are on the political spectrum. You're supposed to believe this is the good guy or that's the good guy. But ultimately, when you dig just beneath the surface, you see they're all connected to the same cabal of diabolical megalomaniacs hoping to build a one world political, economic, and religious system. So I don't think this is a coincidence. I don't think we're being told the truth at all. I don't think the Russians are being told the truth, right? So this is being deliberately escalated, I think. And we've talked about this before, Tony. We know the globalists see war as a means to an end. They put this on paper. In the 1960s, they hired Lincoln Bloomfield at the State Department to write this report, A World Effectively Controlled by the United Nations. And he concluded that the fastest way to get a one world system controlled by the United Nations was to use war and the threat of war. And he concluded that for good reasons. World War I produced the League of Nations. World War II produced the UN, the EU, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, all the different institutions of globalism that we understand today. And so they're hoping, I believe, that a third world war in which millions of people died would lay the foundation for permanently dismantling national sovereignty. And another possible twist to this, too, Tony, is the possibility of a cyber attack. I do believe they want to take down the internet, probably for a brief time period. I mean, I don't think it would be indefinite. They need the internet for their global control grid. So they'd have to bring it back online. But it'd be very convenient if they could wipe out everybody's bank accounts, wipe out everybody's stock portfolios, wipe out all the archives on YouTube and the internet that document all of this evil and just start from scratch with the infrastructure of the control grid without all those pesky voices that have been exposing this. And then if you want to get online, if you want to post on social media, you got to use your digital ID. If you want to trade on the internet, you got to use your CBDC. So it would be a very nice opportunity for, as Klaus Schwab says, a great reset of the internet. And of course, they're preparing for this. The cyber polygon exercise, where they imagined a scenario where communications stopped, telecommunications stopped, and what would happen? He said it would make the COVID look like a small disturbance by comparison. And I think he's right. It would be absolutely catastrophic, like nothing we've ever seen before.
And you do have, like, the Bank for International Settlements quite vocal about their, position with CBDCs and where that's all going. And you're right. You've got to have, as Alice Bailey's books said, a catastrophic kind of event, the world coming out of a catastrophe, for them to bring all these things together. And so what you're suggesting, it would be a perfect way to do that.
Yeah. And I want to talk about the BRICS for a moment. There's something, I'm glad you mentioned Alice Bailey. This is something that not one in a million people is looking at, but the Lucis Trust, right? This was the Lucifer Publishing Foundation, publishing company created by Alice Bailey, who, by the way, her occult New Age ideas are right at the core of this whole process. They just put out their latest newsletter, the 2024 autumn or fall newsletter. And it's about the divine economy. And when they say divine, again, remember, Lucifer Publishing, right? For them, everything is inverted. And they talk about the emergence of this divine economy from the geopolitical tensions of the 21st century. And they talk about the BRICS and the rearranging of the world order as the next step in this evolution of humankind. I'll read you a couple of quotes from their newsletter here. And again, if you want to understand the globalists, you have to understand Alice Bailey. And she talks here about how the nations of Eurasia, along with the developing nations of the global south, are collaborating to form one economic bloc, the BRICS, to challenge the hegemony of the G7 nations that have effectively monopolized global economic policy, as well as other international issues. And they say this development may be more of a contributing factor to the present global tensions than is widely understood or admitted by the West. While the U.S. has been the omnipresent global power in global affairs with European support, the era is rapidly moving toward a greater distribution of power and influence. And they like this. Here's what they say. This shift towards a multipolar world is gathering pace as energy continues to pour into human consciousness from a variety of sources, not least Shambhala, the center where the will of God is known. As this power descends on Earth and the law of economy converts it into material expression, a corresponding increase in planetary events is to be expected. It is therefore vital at this time in world history that spiritual vision is more firmly grounded in global affairs to direct the surge of divine power into the right channels. Folks, this is satanic. They're giving you the roadmap, right? This satanic situation that is developing rapidly right now is going to involve a destruction of the old order, a destruction of what used to be known as Christendom, destruction of what used to be known as the United States, and the emergence of this new multipolar system where the communist Chinese slave system, based on hostility to the Bible, to biblical principles, is the norm, is underpinning all of this. And again, they're telling you, all you got to do is read their newsletters and you will see how all of this ties in with their occult New Age agenda. They're happy about it.
And what a lot of people don't realize is that the Lucis Trust is actually centered in the UN, and in the US, in the UN, but also in Geneva as well. So, they are not some little fringe group. They've been basically instrumental in publishing and so forth within the UN since day one.
That's right. If you go to UN headquarters, and I was just there, they've got a prayer meditation room, right? And of course, one of the key players in establishing this abomination was Alice Bailey. If you go to the World Core Curriculum, I've got a whole chapter on this in my newest book, Indoctrinating Our Children to Death. The guy who wrote the World Core Curriculum, Robert Mueller, Undersecretary General of the UN, who said it needs to be taught in every school to every child in every country, he admits in the foreword to the teacher's manual that this World Core Curriculum is based on the teachings of Alice Bailey, again, the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company. So you cannot understand what is happening in the world today unless you understand, and you can think all this is nonsense. If you're not a Christian and you don't believe the Bible, you can think these people are nuts. It doesn't matter what you think about this. The fact is they believe this, right? They believe that Lucifer is the good guy, that he's bringing light to mankind, that he's going to free us from this oppressive deity, Jehovah or Yahweh, Jesus Christ. So, folks, this is what they believe. They tell you that this is what they believe. So regardless of where you're at in your relationship with the Lord, and I hope if you don't know him yet, you will come to know him very soon. That is my prayer for you today. But even if you don't know the Lord, recognize the megalomaniacs that are driving geopolitics today are all at the highest levels, not your useful idiots, but at the highest levels, they're all on board with this agenda from the pit of hell. And you cannot understand geopolitics without understanding that element of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's true. And I just wish more people would realize it. And, they have their hope in other things without realizing the whole thing is rotten to the core. At the core. So have you got any other bits and pieces that you would like to share, Alex, like other information that you have?
Well, one of the big announcements that happened at the UN Climate Summit was that the UN is now creating a new global censorship initiative. This was announced by Secretary General Antonio Guterres, a socialist. It was announced by UN Communications czar Melissa Fleming, Undersecretary General for Communications, and the Marxist regime of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva in Brazil, probably most famous for censoring everybody, right?
Yeah.
He's the one who literally, with help from their clown Supreme Court, took Twitter offline because they wouldn't agree to censor people vigorously enough for the Marxist regime of Lula. So all these guys together announced that they're creating a new censorship cartel to silence what they're calling climate misinformation and disinformation. The thing is, Tony, your average American, your average New Zealander, even the ones who understand this is all a fraud, they think of it as like a cute sideshow, right? At worst, it's a group of criminals trying to steal our money. And it is that. I mean, I don't want to downplay that, but it's much bigger than that. The whole global agenda hinges on this climate scam. So that's why they have to brainwash your kids with this. That's why they have to censor the internet so that you can't talk about this. That's why they have to add this to the 2029 International Standardized Test. That's why they have to extract $1.3 trillion from you every year to keep this scam going. That's why they have to build the international carbon markets, even though nobody in their right mind thinks this is a good idea except the people who have a big financial incentive. So when you understand how critical the climate hoax is to the global political agenda, the global economic agenda, and the global religious agenda, then it makes sense why all this stuff is happening. So that's why they're going to be censoring us more and more. It's going to become harder and harder to find people like Tony, to find people like me. They've practically disappeared us from Google already.
Yeah.
In 2022, Melissa Fleming announced that the UN had partnered with Google to silence people like me.
Yeah.
And I confronted her about this in New York just a few months ago at the Summit of the Future. I said, hey, could you just give us the formula, right? How do we know what Google and you at the UN are going to silence and what people are going to be allowed to see and what people are going to be allowed to say? And she wouldn't tell me. So this is fundamental to understanding where we're at. And I would encourage people now, it's good to know what's going on. As the Apostle Paul says, we're not ignorant of Satan's devices. We want to know what kind of evil he is up to. We want to know the lies and the trickery he is using. But even more importantly than that, we want to remember the main thing. The main thing is Jesus Christ is Lord. Jesus Christ is coming back. There are people dying now and every day who are going to spend eternity in hell because they died in their sins. And so, folks, the time is short. Go out, preach the gospel, make disciples of all nations, teach them to obey, baptize them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and start in your own home, start in your own community, start in your own city or town, but recognize that all of this is related, and the Bible should be your primary source for good information.
That's absolutely right. And but just on the whole climate thing, it's like every article on mainstream media, whether it's in America or New Zealand, or doesn't matter which side of the spectrum it is on, everything is blamed on climate change. If you get an unseasonable cold snap, this is climate. If you get it hot, this is climate. If there's a storm, if there's strong winds, there's no questioning. It's just pumped out in every article on the weather. And I've noticed that getting more and more so. So it's all, like you say, a hoax and lies. And the trouble is that even a lot of Christians are buying into it. Yep. Instead of looking at what does the Bible tell us is what the end times are going to look like. So, yeah.
Yep. And I want to touch on that real quick, Tony. I know we're up against the clock, but the Christians buying into this, that for me is the most heartbreaking part of all this. And we do have an obligation to be good stewards of this planet, but we need to have a proper theology about this planet. This planet was a gift of God to humanity. God told us to rule over it. He put us in charge of it, and it was a tool. It's not an end in and of itself. And if you read your Bible, this planet is going to burn, okay? It is going to burn. It's not going to be because of your CO2 emissions. So when you're advocating for all this global warming nonsense, you're showing a profound ignorance of what the Scripture teaches. Our concern should be with souls. Our concern should be with God's glory, not with saving a disposable planet that's going to be going up in flames at some point. No matter what you do, no matter how much carbon taxes you pay, this planet is done for, and God's going to make a new heavens and a new earth. So let's not invest too much of our time and energy fighting against CO2. Let's spend our time reaching the lost, sharing the good news, and teaching people what God has commanded us to teach them for His sake, for His glory, and for His kingdom.
You mean the Vicar of Christ that sits in the Vatican in Rome, Pope Francis, is wrong? You're not telling me.
Very wrong. And we'll be nice about it. He's very, very wrong. And of course, the Pope Francis is one of the key drivers of the religious side of this, right? He actually was supposed to come to last year's COP conference. He got sick, so he sent his Secretary of State. But he is one of the key drivers of this one world religious movement where all the religions of the world are supposed to come together, rally behind the UN, rally behind the climate scam to save precious Mother Earth from the ravages of carbon emissions. It's ludicrous, it's blasphemous, and Christians should have no part in this. What fellowship hath Christ with Belial, right? And the answer should be none.
Yeah, and I guess if people are from the Catholic Church and listening to this, it's pretty much you need to examine what Pope Francis is actually standing for, because you're dead right, Alex.
And ironically, Tony, a lot of what Pope Francis is preaching violates even traditional Catholic doctrine. I mean, you look back at what the Catholic Church has historically believed. I've got a Catholic priest on tape. I interviewed him a couple of years ago, telling me on camera the Pope was preaching doctrines of demons. Okay, because what he's teaching not only flies in the face of what the Bible teaches, it flies in the face of what the Catholic Church and previous popes have taught for centuries. So Catholics, we love you just like we love all people. God commanded us to love all people, but go to the Word of God and see how it lines up with what Bergoglio is teaching you. And where it doesn't line up, be in prayer, ask God to show you who's telling the truth, His Word or Bergoglio.
Absolutely, totally agree. So, Alex, now where can people find you, if they want to look at your other work and online and so forth?
Thank you, Tony. So all the stuff we did on climate change, you can find that at thenewamerican.com. My colleague Andrew Muller and I, he's my chief of operations at Liberty Sentinel, he and I went to cover this for The New American. So that's all at thenewamerican.com. We'll have some articles in the print magazine as well coming out very soon. I don't know if it's possible to subscribe to the print magazine in New Zealand, but you can at least get the free online stuff. And then my personal newsletter, libertysentinel.org, you can sign up there, totally free. And it's a very, very good way to stay informed, not just on the climate stuff, but all this other craziness that's going on. And of course, regular guests here on your program. And I thank you for that very much, Tony. Thanks for all you're doing.
And thank you again for another information-filled episode of it's been awesome. So much food for thought, and I hope people will share this video widely because people need to know this stuff. So thank you for bringing it out again, Alex.
Thank you so much, Tony. God bless you.
Bless you too. Cheers. And folks, also, please make sure you subscribe to us at aminutomidnight.com. We do have YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, and Apple Podcasts channels, but our website, aminutomidnight.com, is where everything goes primarily. So please subscribe to us down the right-hand side of the page if you haven't already done so. We do run A Minute to Midnight 100% by donations. As always, I like to really say a big thank you to the people that do help us keep afloat through donating. And if anyone else does want to help us by donating, you can do that at aminutomidnight.com. There's a donations page on the website. And the music used on the shows I've written, played and recorded. So God bless, and God willing, we will be back with another episode in a few days' time.